So, when you think of a church, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's probably a building, right? But what if a church wasn't a building at all? In this explainer, we're going to dig into a sermon that totally rethinks what a church is meant to be. And it uses an ancient temple as a pretty surprising guide. Let's get into it. Okay, to kick things off, just look at the crazy variety of things people call a church. This is Gereja Ayam, better known as the chicken church, over in Indonesia. Now, the architect meant for it to be a dove, but, well, it's definitely a place of worship you won't forget. Or how about this? A tank church. Yeah, you heard that right. It's an art installation, of course, but wow, it powerfully smashes together these symbols of conflict and of sanctuary. It really messes with your expectations of what a secret space is supposed to look like. And then there's this, something totally different. It's a church in the Netherlands made of what look like giant, colorful building blocks. Super playful, super modern, and it actually served as a temporary community hub. So when you see all these wild variations, it leads us right to the big question from our source material. I mean, if a church can be a chicken or a tank or made of giant blocks, what's the one thing, the fundamental essence, that actually makes a church a church? So the first idea the sermon explores is exactly that. Maybe a place of worship doesn't have to have one specific shape or form. And these examples just drive that point home. You've got communities gathering in churches, literally carved from ice in Romania, or in tiny little chapels just balancing kind of impossibly on these stone pillars in Georgia. It seems like the building material and the location are way less important than the simple act of people coming together. And it's not just the buildings that can change, it's the service itself. The source brings up the drive-in church, a concept built for our busy modern lives. You don't even have to get out of your car. It really suggests that the what and the why of worship matter a whole lot more than the where. But then, right after showing us all of this incredible modern diversity, the sermon takes a sharp turn. It says, hey, to find the real essence of a church, we have to look past all these different buildings and go back 3,000 years to one very specific structure. And that structure is Solomon's temple. As it's described in the biblical book of 1Kings, this ancient building becomes the sermon's central guide for what a place of worship should really be aiming for. Now here's the thing, the sermon isn't really focused on the grand exterior or all the gold. It zooms in on a very specific detail about the inside of the temple. And that one detail is the key to this whole message. And this is the crucial line right here. Pay close attention to that last part. Everything was cedar, no stone was to be seen. So inside this incredibly holy space, the cold, hard stone of the structure was completely covered. Everything you saw, touched, and even smelled was wood. And we're not talking about just any wood. This was cedar of Lebanon. It was famous for its beauty, yeah, but also for its distinct, pleasant fragrance that lasts for a long, long time. So just imagine walking into this massive temple, and instead of a sterile, stony echo, you're surrounded by the rich, warm, natural aroma of cedar. That sensory experience is the whole foundation for the sermon's central metaphor. All right, so let's unpack this. The sermon takes this literal physical fragrance of the cedar-lined temple and turns it into this powerful spiritual metaphor for what a church community is supposed to be. So, what is this aroma of Christ? Well, according to the sermon, it's not something you can actually smell. It's the intangible atmosphere a church creates. It's their collective character, their actions, their positive influence on everyone they meet. The real church, it argues, isn't the building, it's this spiritual fragrance. And this idea isn't just pulled out of thin air, it comes directly from Scripture. This verse from 2 Corinthians makes an explicit connection between believers and the idea of being a pleasing aroma. It's all about putting something positive and attractive out into the world, an influence that's felt by everybody. So what is this spiritual aroma actually made of? It's not magic. The sermon breaks it down into these really concrete qualities. Things like self-sacrifice, devotion, humbleness, love, mercy. These are like the individual notes that combine to create the fragrance. But, just like any precious perfume, it comes at a cost. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most challenging point from the sermon, A beautiful fragrance doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It has to be created. And that process, well, it requires sacrifice. To really make this point land, the sermon uses this amazing analogy. To produce just 28 grams, that's about 1 ounce, of pure rose oil, you need 45 kilograms of rose petals. That is a massive amount of raw material just to get a tiny little bit of that precious essence. And that's the whole point right there. A positive spiritual atmosphere, just like a perfume, is the end result of a process. It takes dedication, it takes effort, and it takes being willing to give up a lot to produce something beautiful. This sermon even uses another biblical example to show this, the instructions for making holy incense. Notice the verbs, the action words. You have to take the spices, you have to blend them, and then you have to grind them. It's a very active, very transformative process. And this is where it all clicks into place. That physical process of making perfume or incense, it's a direct parallel to the spiritual process. To create that aroma, the sermon says, a person's pride has to be broken. They have to go through the grinding of trials. And they have to be squeezed in a way, devoting everything they have to produce that precious, fragrant character. So let's pull all these threads together. We started with all these wild buildings, and we've ended up talking about the inner character of a community. The sermon really takes us on a journey from a physical place to a spiritual state of being. Here's the bottom line, the main takeaway, all in one sentence. The architecture, the building, none of that really matters. What truly matters is the invisible atmosphere of love, mercy, and sacrifice that the people inside generate and then release out into the world. So in the end, the sermon leaves us with this image and a final thought. The true measure of a church isn't how many people can fit inside its walls, but how far its positive fragrance can travel beyond them. Which kind of leaves a question for all of us, doesn't it? What kind of aroma are we creating?